My name is Thomas Vickers, and I've been an Alaska wildlife trooper for 17 years. Before that, I spent 6 years as a wilderness guide in the Brooks Range and 3 years with Fish and Game in Fairbanks. I know the Alaska backcountry the way most people know their neighborhood streets. I've tracked wolves through blizzards, rescued stranded hikers from glacial crevasses, investigated illegal hunting operations that took me 200 miles from the nearest road, and pulled bodies from frozen rivers when people underestimated this state's capacity for violence. I say this not to brag, but to establish something crucial before I tell you what happened in March of 2024. I am not someone who spooks easily. I understand wilderness. I respect it. And I know the difference between dangerous wildlife behavior and my own imagination playing tricks in the midnight sun or the winter dark. What I experienced 140 miles northwest of Fairbanks, in an area we call the Tanana Flats, wasn't imagination, and it wasn't natural wildlife behavior. And every single day since then, I have struggled with the decision to stay silent or to tell someone, anyone, what's really happening in that 47 square mile zone that doesn't appear on any tourist maps and that we've been ordered never to discuss with civilians. Before I continue, if you're enjoying these stories from law enforcement and wilderness professionals, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to bring you more true accounts like this one. And I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. Are any of you watching from Alaska? Have you ever been out in the real wilderness? The kind where you can walk for a week and never see another human being, and felt like something was watching you from the tree line? If you have, pay attention to what I'm about to tell you. After what happened last month, after we lost 4 more people to that zone, and after I learned that the reports of missing hunters in that area go back not just years but decades, I can no longer remain silent about what the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and certain federal agencies would prefer stayed buried in classified files. Everyone has the right to know what is really happening in the forest, 18 miles north of the Tanana River, between coordinates that I'm not supposed to share, but that I will anyway, because people's lives are worth more than my career. 64.9875 degrees north, 151.2341 degrees west. That's the southeastern corner of what we internally call Sector 19. The northwestern corner is 65.12047 degrees north, 151.8904 degrees west. Those coordinates define an irregular polygon of boreal forest, muskeg, and low hills that has been consuming people since at least 1952, according to records I've found. Though the Athabascan elders will tell you it's been happening since long before that. Since before Russians came to Alaska. Since before their people even arrived in this land. March 15th, 2024. That's the date everything changed for me. Though I now understand the process had actually started weeks earlier, and I just hadn't recognized the signs. I received a dispatch call at 0847 hours about a possible poaching incident in the Tanana Flats region. A moose had been killed illegally, field-dressed improperly, and only partially harvested, which suggested either inexperienced hunters or someone who'd been interrupted. The report came from a trapper named Donald Sorensen, who ran a line through that area and who'd stumbled across the kill site about 6 miles off the park's highway. Standard protocol. I'd handled maybe 24 similar calls over the years. Poaching is a persistent problem in Alaska, where hunting regulations are strict and enforced seriously, but where the vastness of the wilderness makes comprehensive monitoring impossible. One trooper might be responsible for an area the size of some eastern states. I loaded my gear into my truck, checked my GPS unit, radio, and satellite phone, and headed out on what I expected to be a routine investigation that would involve photographing the scene, collecting evidence, possibly tracking the poachers if they'd left a clear trail, and filing a report. The weather was typical for mid-March in interior Alaska. Temperature around 18 degrees Fahrenheit, overcast sky, about 8 inches of old crusty snow on the ground with patches of bare earth showing through where the sun had been working. Not extreme conditions by Alaska standards. I've worked in -40 with wind chill that can freeze exposed skin in minutes. This was practically mild. I met Sorensen at a pullout on the park's highway at 10:15 hours. He was in his early 60s, lean and weathered the way people get when they've spent most of their lives outside in harsh climates. He'd been running trap lines in interior Alaska for 38 years and knew the country better than most wildlife troopers. He seemed agitated when I pulled up, which wasn't unusual. Trappers and hunters tend to take wildlife violations personally, viewing poachers as criminals who threaten both animal populations and the reputation of legitimate outdoorsmen. We exchanged greetings. I checked my gear, and we started the hike in. Sorensen led the way on snowshoes, following a route he knew well from years of running his trap line. The forest was typical interior Alaska boreal, mostly white spruce and black spruce with some birch and aspen, dense in places and open in others, quiet except for the occasional chatter of a red squirrel or the distant call of a raven. We pushed through for about 90 minutes, covering maybe 4 miles. The terrain was flat to gently rolling, typical Tanana Flats geography. Sorensen wasn't particularly talkative, which I attributed to his age and the exertion of breaking trail through snow. When we finally stopped, he pointed ahead to a clearing about 40 yards distant. I could see dark shapes in the snow that I recognized immediately as the remains of a moose carcass. Standard scene so far. We approached carefully, me photographing as we walked, documenting the surroundings before we disturbed anything. The moose was a cow, maybe 4 or 5 years old, perhaps 800 pounds alive. She'd been shot once through the chest, a good kill shot that would have dropped her quickly. The field dressing had been started but not finished properly. The hindquarters had been removed along with the back straps, but a lot of good meat had been left behind. Wasteful. Illegal. The kind of thing that makes wildlife professionals angry because it suggests the kill was about ego or convenience rather than genuine subsistence or sport hunting within legal bounds. I was photographing the scene, making notes, looking for shell casings or other evidence when Sorensen said something that should have warned me. He said, "Thomas, you notice anything odd about this?" I looked up from my camera. "Odd how?" I asked. He gestured around the clearing. "No tracks?" he said. I frowned and looked at the snow more carefully. He was right. There were tracks coming into the clearing, and there were marks in the snow around the carcass where it had been field dressed and where the quarters had been dragged. But there were no tracks leading into the clearing and no tracks leading out. No boot prints, no snowshoe marks, no sign of how the poacher had arrived or departed. In snow, even old crusty snow, you leave marks. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, looking for any indication of entry or exit. Nothing. The snow was undisturbed, except where we'd walked. Sorensen watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "This is why I called you instead of just burying it," he said. "Burying it?" I asked. He shrugged. I've found kills like this 3 times in the past 8 years, all in this general area. No tracks in, no tracks out, good meat left behind. The first time I reported it. Game warden at the time told me to forget about it, said it wasn't worth the paperwork. The second time I didn't bother reporting, just left it for the scavengers. But this is the third one, and Thomas, he said, lowering his voice even though we were miles from anyone, this isn't right. This isn't natural. People don't kill moose and leave meat behind and leave no tracks. I told him I'd document everything and investigate thoroughly. He nodded, but he looked relieved when I said he could head back if he wanted. He did want. He was gone within 5 minutes, moving fast through the forest back toward the highway. I spent another 2 hours at the scene, photographing from every angle, collecting what little physical evidence existed, taking GPS coordinates, making detailed notes. The temperature had dropped. It was maybe 12 degrees now, and the light was starting to change as afternoon approached. I finished my documentation and decided to do a quick sweep of the surrounding area to see if I could determine where the poacher might have approached from, assuming there was some explanation for the lack of tracks that I was missing. I moved into the forest, north of the clearing, moving slowly, scanning for any disturbance. The woods were quiet. Too quiet, I realized, though at the time I attributed it to the cold. Wildlife goes quiet when temperatures drop. I pushed maybe 200 yards north, and that's when I noticed my GPS unit was acting strangely. The coordinates were flickering, changing slightly, settling on a reading that placed me approximately 400 yards from where I actually was according to my mental map. I stopped, checked the unit, tried to reset it. The screen flickered again, and now showed coordinates that were completely impossible, placing me somewhere in the Bering Sea. I turned the unit off and back on. When it reinitialized, the coordinates stabilized, but they were still wrong by several hundred yards. Equipment malfunction. It happens, especially in cold weather, though this unit was relatively new and had been working perfectly an hour earlier. I pulled out my compass. Old school navigation. I watched the needle swing toward north, settle, then slowly begin to drift clockwise. I tapped the compass. The needle continued its slow rotation, completing a full circle over the course of about 30 seconds, then starting another rotation. Broken compass. Malfunctioning GPS. Frustrating, but not catastrophic. I could navigate by the sun if I needed to, by landmarks, by memory of the terrain. I decided to continue my sweep of the area before heading back. I pushed deeper into the woods, now moving more by instinct than by instrument, looking for any sign of human passage. The forest seemed to grow denser, the spruce trees pressing closer together, their branches creating a canopy that blocked much of the weak afternoon light. The temperature felt wrong. My thermometer had read 12 degrees Fahrenheit at the kill site, but here, only a few hundred yards away, it felt colder, perhaps -10 or -20, cold enough that my breath crystallized instantly and hung in the air longer than it should have. I kept moving forward, though some part of my brain was suggesting I should turn back. Then I found the first marker. It was a cairn, a stack of stones about 3 feet high, placed deliberately in a small clearing. I approached it cautiously. Cairns in wilderness areas usually mark trails or significant locations. This one looked old. The stones covered with lichen, frost patterns indicating they'd been undisturbed for years. There was something else. At the base of the cairn, frozen into the ground, was what looked like an animal skull. I knelt down for a closer look. Wolf skull, I thought initially, but as I examined it more carefully, I realized the proportions were wrong. The snout was too short, the cranium too large, the eye sockets too forward-facing. It looked like someone had tried to sculpt a wolf skull from memory, but had gotten several details wrong. I photographed it, noted its location as best I could with malfunctioning instruments, and stood up. That's when I noticed the trees. Around this clearing, in a perfect circle about 30 yards in diameter, every spruce tree had been stripped of bark at exactly the same height, approximately 7 feet off the ground. The exposed wood underneath was dark, weathered, indicating this had been done long ago. I counted the trees, 33 of them, evenly spaced, forming a precise circle around the cairn. This was deliberate. This was significant. This wasn't random poacher activity. I checked my watch. 14:47 hours. I'd been in the woods for over 3 hours. Time to head back before light failed. I turned to retrace my steps and realized I wasn't sure which direction I'd come from. The forest looked the same in every direction. Dense spruce, patches of snow, no distinguishing landmarks. I forced myself to calm down. Panic kills people in wilderness situations. I had training, experience, survival gear. I pulled out my compass. The needle was still rotating slowly, uselessly. I tried my GPS unit again. It showed coordinates that placed me in northern Canada. I tried my radio. Static. I tried my satellite phone. No signal, which was impossible. Satellite phones work anywhere on Earth with a clear view of the sky. I looked up. The canopy here was dense, but not impenetrable. I should have signal. I forced myself to think logically. I'd been walking roughly north from the kill site. Therefore, I needed to walk roughly south to return. I identified the sun's position in the sky, weak as it was through the clouds, and started walking in what I believed was the correct direction. I walked for what felt like an hour. My watch showed 15:12 hours. 25 minutes had passed. Time perception distortion, I told myself. Stress, cold, disorientation. I kept walking. The forest remained unnervingly uniform. Same dense spruce, same spacing, same quality of light filtering through the canopy. I should have reached the kill site, or at least the clearing where we'd found it. I should have intersected my own tracks. I saw nothing familiar. I stopped and reassessed. Standard wilderness survival protocol says, when you're lost, stop moving, stay calm, wait for rescue, or for conditions to improve. But I wasn't lost in the traditional sense. I knew roughly where I was. I had supplies, cold weather gear, the ability to survive a night out if necessary. I decided to continue moving, now focusing on finding any landmark I recognized. That's when I heard the sound. It started as a low hum, barely perceptible, like distant machinery or wind through a canyon. But we were in flat forest. There were no canyons, no machinery. The sound grew gradually louder, resolving into something that resembled singing or chanting, multiple voices harmonizing, but not in any language I recognized. The sound seemed to come from all directions at once, and from no direction at all. I turned slowly, trying to identify a source. The sound continued, rising and falling in pitch, creating harmonics that made my teeth ache. Then I saw them. Movement between the trees, perhaps 50 yards distant. Dark shapes, too tall to be bears, moving with a strange gliding quality that didn't match normal human gait. I called out, identifying myself as an Alaska wildlife trooper, asking if they needed assistance. The shapes stopped moving. The singing sound ceased abruptly. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heartbeat, my breathing, nothing else. No wind, no bird calls, no small animal sounds. The forest had gone completely dead silent in a way that violated every natural pattern I knew. The shapes remained motionless for perhaps 30 seconds. Then one of them moved toward me. As it approached, emerging from between the trees into clearer light, I felt my understanding of reality begin to fracture. It was shaped like a human, roughly 6 feet tall, bipedal, moving forward with steady steps. But the proportions were wrong in ways that my brain struggled to process. The arms were too long, reaching past the knees. The head was too large and seemed to sit on the shoulders without a neck. The torso was too narrow, compressed, as if someone had taken a human body and pushed it together like an accordion. It wore what looked like clothing, dark fabric, or fur, or something else. But the clothing seemed to move independently of the body beneath it, rippling and shifting even though there was no wind. As it got closer, perhaps 30 feet away now, I could see its face, or where a face should have been. The head was smooth, featureless except for 2 dark pits where eyes might be, and a vertical slash where a mouth would go. No nose, no other features. The thing stopped approximately 20 feet from me. I had my hand on my sidearm, but something prevented me from drawing it. Instinct, maybe, or recognition that a weapon would be useless against something that shouldn't exist. It stood there, motionless, the vertical slash that might have been a mouth opening slightly. The singing sound started again, but now I could tell it was coming from this thing. From that vertical opening, multiple voices harmonizing impossibly from a single source. The sound formed words, not in English, but somehow I understood their meaning. Brother, it said, or the concept of brother, of kinship, of recognition. You've wandered far. Come back to the path. Its arm, that too long arm, extended toward me. The hand or what served as a hand spreading fingers that were too thin and had too many joints. Behind it, other shapes had emerged from the trees. 5, no 7, no more appearing as I watched. They stood in a rough semicircle, all with that same impossible anatomy, all absolutely silent except for the one that was speaking or singing or whatever it was doing. Time isn't a line here, brother, the voices said through that vertical mouth. The boundary is thin. You've crossed without meaning to. We can show you back, but you'll remember. You'll always remember. And when you remember, you'll understand why the markers exist, why the warnings were given, why some places in this world are meant to remain undisturbed. I don't remember making the decision to run. My body made it for me. I turned and sprinted through the forest, crashing through underbrush, bouncing off tree trunks, moving with pure panic-driven adrenaline. Behind me I heard or felt movement. Those things following, but not hurrying, not chasing frantically, but keeping pace with a steady inevitability. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out, until my vision narrowed to a tunnel. Then suddenly, I was falling, tumbling down a slope I hadn't seen, rolling through snow and exposed earth, coming to rest in a heap at the bottom of a ravine. I didn't remember being there. I lay there for perhaps 2 minutes, trying to breathe, trying to think. When I finally managed to sit up and look around, I realized I could see lights in the distance. Electric lights. Civilization. I climbed out of the ravine, oriented myself toward the lights, and walked. 20 minutes later, I emerged onto the park's highway, less than half a mile from where I'd left my truck. I checked my watch. 15:23 hours. By my perception, I'd been in the woods for over 4 hours since finding the kill site. By clock time, less than 90 minutes had passed. I made it to my truck, got inside, turned the heat on maximum, and sat there shaking for 10 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. My GPS unit, when I checked it in the truck, was working perfectly, showing correct coordinates. My compass pointed properly north. My satellite phone had full signal. Everything was functioning as it should. I drove back to Fairbanks in a daze, barely registering the road, operating on autopilot. When I got home, I documented everything in my personal journal. Every detail I could remember, because I knew even then that my official report would contain none of what I'd actually experienced. You don't report encounters with impossible entities to your supervisors. You don't write official government documents describing reality distortions. You either keep silent or you end your career and possibly end up in psychiatric evaluation. For 3 days, I tried to convince myself I'd experienced some combination of hypothermia, carbon monoxide exposure, possibly a minor stroke or seizure. The human brain is capable of producing vivid hallucinations under stress. I'm a rational person. I wanted a rational explanation. On the 4th day, I received a phone call at my office. The voice on the other end identified himself as Dr. Richard Moss from the Department of Interior, Division of Lands and Resources Management. He said he'd been reviewing reports from my sector and wanted to discuss an incident from March 15th. I felt my stomach drop. I asked what specifically he wanted to discuss. He said he'd prefer to meet in person. Could I come to an address in Fairbanks the next morning? It wasn't really a question. I agreed. The address he gave me wasn't a government building. It was a small office complex on the south side of Fairbanks, nondescript, the kind of place that houses insurance agencies and small tech companies. I arrived at 0900 hours as requested. The suite number led me to an unmarked door. I knocked. Dr. Moss opened it immediately, as if he'd been waiting right on the other side. He was perhaps 50, average height, average build, wearing business casual clothing, with the kind of face that's hard to remember 5 minutes after you've seen it. He invited me in. The office was small, containing a desk, 2 chairs, a laptop, and nothing else. No decorations, no paperwork, no personal effects. He gestured for me to sit. I did. He sat across from me and opened the laptop. For the next 30 minutes, he asked me questions about March 15th. What time did I receive the call? What route did I take to the site? What did I observe? How long was I in the forest? Did I experience any equipment malfunctions? Did I see anything unusual? I answered carefully, giving him the facts that would be in any official report, leaving out the parts that sounded insane. He listened, made notes on the laptop, showed no emotion. When I finished my sanitized account, he closed the laptop and looked at me directly for the first time. "Trooper Vickers," he said, "I'm going to share some information with you that is classified under the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, as amended. This classification supersedes normal government secrecy protocols. What I'm about to tell you cannot be shared with anyone, including your supervisors, your family, or any other law enforcement personnel, without explicit authorization from my office. Do you understand?" I said I understood. He continued, "The area you entered on March 15th has been under federal observation since 1953. What you experienced is consistent with 70 years of documented incidents in that specific geographic zone. We don't fully understand the phenomenon. We have theories, but no definitive explanation. What we do know is that the zone, which we designate as Anomalous Area 19, exhibits properties that violate our understanding of physics, particularly regarding time, space, and consciousness. The indigenous people of this region, specifically the lower Tanana Athabascan bands, have traditional knowledge about this location going back centuries. They call it different things in their language, but the English translation is generally something like the place where spirits walk both sides, or the thin place, or the crossing. They have protocols for interacting with or avoiding the area. These protocols were violated when white settlers arrived and continue to be violated by modern activity in the region. Dr. Moss opened a drawer in the desk and removed a folder. He placed it in front of me. Inside were photographs, documents, reports. The photographs showed the same cairn I'd found, though these photos were clearly old, printed on paper stock from decades ago. The documents were incident reports, missing persons files, scientific data sheets. I scanned through them quickly, catching dates ranging from 1953 to 2023. Dr. Moss spoke while I read. In 1953, a military survey team was conducting what was officially described as geological mapping in interior Alaska. The actual purpose was to identify potential sites for underground nuclear testing as part of Project Chariot. The team consisted of 12 personnel, 8 military surveyors, 3 civilian scientists, 1 Athabascan guide. The team entered what we now call Anomalous Area 19 on June 21st, summer solstice. 5 members of the team, including the guide, returned 3 days later. They were found walking on the park's highway, approximately 10 miles from their entry point. They had no memory of the intervening time. Their equipment was missing or non-functional. Their clothing showed wear consistent with months of exposure, though only 3 days had passed. Most significantly, all 5 exhibited physical anomalies. I looked up from the folder. "What kind of anomalies?" I asked. Dr. Moss pulled another photograph from the folder. It showed a man, presumably one of the survey team members, standing shirtless. His chest was marked with what looked like severe frostbite, dark tissue covering most of his torso in a pattern that resembled a handprint, fingers splayed wide, though the hand would have to be impossibly large to create that mark. The man was clearly dead in the photograph. This was an autopsy image. Dr. Moss said, "This is Sergeant William Hayes. He died 6 weeks after returning from the zone." The mark continued to spread slowly across his body, despite all treatment attempts. The other 4 survivors exhibited similar marks, though in different locations. 2 died within 3 months. 1 lasted 8 years before succumbing. The final survivor, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, one of the civilian scientists, is still alive. She lives in a secure facility in California. She hasn't aged visibly since 1953. She's 93 years old chronologically, but appears to be in her mid-30s. She exists in what we can only describe as a state of temporal suspension. I stared at the photograph, at that impossible handprint burned into dead flesh. Dr. Moss continued, "Since that initial incident, we've documented 47 additional events in Anomalous Area 19. Missing hikers, hunters, researchers. Some return, some don't. Those who do return are changed. They report experiences similar to yours, encounters with entities that defy description, reality distortions, time discrepancies, and they all carry marks." He reached across and tapped my chest, right where my cold weather jacket would have been when I was in the woods. "You have one too," he said. "You just haven't looked yet." I stood up immediately, stepped back from the desk. Dr. Moss remained, calm, hands folded in front of him. "Check," he said quietly. "I don't want to," I said, hearing my voice shake. "That makes sense," he said. "But it's there whether you look at it or not, and it will spread, slowly, over the course of months or years. We don't know how to stop it. We've tried everything. It seems to be some kind of quantum entanglement between your physical body and the zone itself. The mark is a connection point. Those who have it report increased sensitivity to temporal anomalies, enhanced perception of dimensional boundaries, sometimes precognition, sometimes the ability to perceive events from multiple timelines simultaneously. The changes are progressive and irreversible." I felt sick. I wanted to leave, to deny everything, to pretend this conversation had never happened. But instead, I asked the obvious question. "Why are you telling me this?" He smiled slightly, the first emotion I'd seen from him. "Because you're going to need to understand what's happening to you. Because there's work that needs to be done in relation to the zone, work that requires people like you, people who've been touched by it, but who retain enough connection to normal reality to function in both worlds. And because the alternative to working with us is trying to navigate this alone, which historically has led to either suicide or complete psychological breakdown within 2 to 3 years, we prefer to intervene early." I sat back down slowly. "What kind of work?" I asked. Dr. Moss opened the laptop again. "We call it boundary maintenance," he said. "The zone is expanding. Slowly, perhaps 1 meter per year on average, but accelerating. In 1953, it covered approximately 39 square miles. Now it covers 47 square miles. If expansion continues at current rates, it will begin affecting populated areas within 50 years. We need to understand why it's growing, how to contain it, and what the entities within it want." Yes, entities plural. What you encountered was likely a Class 3 manifestation. There are at least 7 distinct types we've categorized, ranging from simple visual anomalies to fully autonomous entities that can interact with baseline reality. The Athabascan people have knowledge about these entities, traditional protocols for interaction, historical context we desperately need. But they're understandably reluctant to share information with government agencies that have historically dismissed their knowledge as superstition. That's where you come in. As a local law enforcement officer, with ties to the community, with personal experience in the zone, you can serve as a bridge. He closed the laptop and looked at me steadily. "I need to know if you're willing to work with us, Trooper Vickers. This isn't an order. I can't compel you. If you decline, we'll provide medical monitoring for your condition and ask only that you sign a non-disclosure agreement. But if you choose to help, you'll have access to all our research. You'll be compensated well beyond your current salary, and you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you're working to protect people from something that's been claiming lives for decades. What do you say?" I didn't answer immediately. My mind was racing through implications, trying to process information that fundamentally challenged my understanding of reality. Finally, I asked, "The mark you mentioned. I need to see it." Dr. Moss nodded. "There's a bathroom down the hall. Take your time." I stood and walked out of the office, found the bathroom, locked the door behind me. I removed my uniform shirt and undershirt, turned to face the mirror, There, on the left side of my chest, directly over my heart, was a mark about the size of a silver dollar. It looked like a severe burn, but the color was wrong, too dark, almost black, with edges that seemed to shimmer slightly, as if the mark existed slightly out of phase with the surrounding skin. It was cold to the touch. Not cold like ice, but cold like absence, like touching something that existed in a place where heat had never been invented. I stared at it for a long time. Then I got dressed and went back to Dr. Moss's office. "I'll help," I said. He nodded as if he'd never doubted my answer. "Good. Your first assignment is to meet with someone who has extensive knowledge of the traditional Athabascan perspective on Anomalous Area 19. Her name is Sarah Tritt, and she's a lower Tanana elder living in Tanana. I've arranged for you to visit her tomorrow. She's expecting you. Listen to everything she tells you. Document it carefully. Traditional knowledge has proven more accurate than our scientific observations in several key areas. After you meet with her, we'll begin your formal training in boundary maintenance protocols." He handed me a business card with nothing but a phone number on it. "Call this number if you experience any changes in your condition, any unusual perceptions, or any further contact with entities. Someone will answer 24 hours a day." I took the card, put it in my pocket, and left. The rest of that day felt unreal, as if I was moving through someone else's life. I completed my shift on autopilot, went home, tried to eat dinner, but had no appetite, tried to sleep, but lay awake staring at my ceiling until 0300 hours. The mark on my chest felt colder than the room around it. I could sense it there, a point of wrongness on my body, a connection to something vast and terrible. When I finally did sleep, I dreamed of walking through forests where trees grew in impossible spirals, and the sky showed 3 different times of day simultaneously, and voices sang in harmonies that made my bones vibrate with frequencies they weren't designed to experience. I drove to Tanana the next morning, arriving at Sarah Tritt's house around 1000 hours. Tanana is a small community of about 350 people at the confluence of the Tanana and Tanana rivers, traditionally Athabascan territory, now a mixed community, but still maintaining strong indigenous cultural ties. Sarah Tritt's house was a small but well-maintained cabin on the edge of town. She answered my knock immediately, as if she'd been waiting by the door. She was perhaps 70, weathered face, long gray hair tied back, wearing practical cold weather clothing. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, missing nothing. She invited me in without preamble. We sat at her kitchen table. She poured coffee for both of us, without asking if I wanted any. Then she said, in English, with only a slight accent, "Dr. Moss told me one of his people had crossed the boundary. I can see the mark on you, even though it's covered. You carry coldness now." "I'm not one of his people," I said. "I'm a wildlife trooper. I'm just trying to understand what happened to me." She smiled slightly, not unkindly. "You're one of his people now, whether you want to be or not. The mark makes you so. You exist in 2 places at once. Part of you here, part of you there, in the place we call Díínláa, which means, roughly, the crossing place, or the between place in our language. The old people, my grandparents and great-grandparents, they knew that place was dangerous. They had rules about it. You don't go there during solstice times, when the boundary is thinnest. You don't go there alone. You don't take anything from there. You don't speak to the beings you might encounter, because speech creates connection, and connection can pull you through. Most importantly, You don't mark the place with modern things. No buildings, no permanent camps, no surveying equipment, no machines. The land there belongs to the others, and they don't want our interference. She paused to sip her coffee. Of course, she continued, white men came and ignored all the warnings. First Russians, then Americans. They wanted to use that land for their purposes. Never asked permission, never respected the boundaries, and people started disappearing. Not many at first, just one or two, every few years. Enough that we noticed, but not enough that outsiders paid attention. Then in the 1950s, the military came. They wanted to do experiments there. They had some idea that the land had special properties that could be weaponized. Maybe they were right. They sent in teams. The teams didn't all come back. The ones that did come back were changed. After that, the military declared the area off limits, but they never explained why. Our people could have told them, but they never asked. I asked her what the beings were, the entities I'd encountered. She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. In our traditional understanding, she said, the world has layers. Most people live in just one layer, the surface world, the physical world you can touch and see normally. But there are other layers pressed against this one, separated by boundaries that are usually solid, but sometimes thin. Díínláa is a place where the boundary is permanently thin, maybe even torn in some spots. The beings you encountered exist in the other layers. They're not spirits exactly, not in the way missionaries talk about spirits. They're more like people who exist in a different relationship with time and space. Where we experience one moment following another in a line, they experience all moments simultaneously. Where we exist in one specific location at a time, they exist in multiple locations at once. From our perspective, they seem impossible, wrong, shaped incorrectly. From their perspective, we're the limited ones, locked into linear time, confined to single locations. They call us the sleeping ones, because we can only perceive one small slice of reality at a time. I thought about the thing I'd seen in the woods, its two long arms, its featureless face, its voice that spoke in multiple harmonies. Sarah continued, the mark you carry, she said, is the beginning of a bridge between their way of existing and ours. Over time, if you survive, you'll start to perceive reality more like they do. You'll see past and future bleeding into present. You'll sense the other layers pressed against this one. You'll become a translator, someone who exists partially in both worlds. Our people had such translators in the past. We called them the walkers between. They were respected and feared because they saw truths that others couldn't handle. Many went mad from the visions. Some vanished into the other layers entirely. A few found balance and used their gifts to help protect the boundaries, to warn people away from dangerous crossing places, to negotiate with the beings when necessary. She looked at me directly. That's what you're becoming, she said. A walker between. You can fight it, refuse to accept it, try to cling to your old way of seeing. That path leads to psychological breakdown. Or you can learn to navigate both layers, to function in expanded awareness while maintaining enough stability to live in this world. That path is difficult, but possible. Our ancestors did it for generations before the modern world came and disrupted everything. I spent 4 hours with Sarah Tritt that day. She told me stories passed down through generations about Díínláa, about people who'd entered it and what had happened to them, about the protocols that had kept her ancestors safe. She described the different types of beings that could be encountered there, their behaviors, their apparent motivations as far as anyone understood them. She explained that the expansion of the zone Dr. Moss had mentioned wasn't random, but was a response to continued violation of the boundaries, like an immune response or a defense mechanism. The more modern civilization pressed against the zone, tried to map it, study it, contain it, the more it pushed back and grew. She said the only long-term solution was to stop trying to control it and instead respect it, mark clear boundaries, and prevent people from entering. But she also said she doubted the government would ever accept that approach, because governments don't like admitting there are places they can't control and phenomena they can't explain. Before I left, she gave me two things. First, a small leather pouch on a cord, which she said contained what she called protection medicine, specific herbs, and materials that had some effect in maintaining stability when crossing between layers. Wear it always, she said. It won't prevent the changes, but it might slow them and keep you grounded. Second, she gave me a number written on a piece of paper. This is my grandson Jacob, she said. He works for the National Park Service, but he's also been studying our traditional knowledge about Díínláa. He's been there. He has the mark like you, and he's been managing it successfully for 8 years. He can teach you things I can't. Practical techniques for navigating expanded awareness. Call him. Don't try to do this alone. I thanked her and drove back to Fairbanks, feeling simultaneously more informed and more terrified than when I'd arrived. That night, I called the number she'd given me. Jacob Tritt answered on the second ring. His voice was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s. When I explained who I was and that his grandmother had sent me, he was silent for a moment. Then he said, "When did you cross?" "March 15th, I said. "Recent then," he said. "You're probably still in the disorientation phase. Everything feels unreal. Time seems elastic. You're questioning your sanity. That's normal. It'll stabilize in another week or two. Then the real changes start. Can we meet?" I asked. He agreed. We set a time for the following weekend. He lived in Healy, about 2 hours south of Fairbanks. I spent the next few days trying to maintain normalcy, performing my duties as a wildlife trooper, responding to calls, filing reports. But everything felt wrong. I caught myself losing time, finding that hours had passed when I thought only minutes had gone by. I started seeing things in my peripheral vision, shadows that moved wrong, flickers of light that shouldn't be there. The mark on my chest was growing, spreading slowly like frost creeping across a window, now covering an area perhaps twice the size it had been a week ago. I could feel it, not as pain exactly, but as presence, as awareness of connection to something other. Saturday came, and I drove to Healy. Jacob Tritt lived in a small cabin several miles outside town, tucked back in the trees, isolated. He met me at the door, and I understood immediately why Sarah had sent me to him. He had the same quality I was starting to develop, a slight translucence, as if I was seeing him through very faint haze, as if part of him existed slightly out of phase with normal reality. His eyes had a particular quality, too, like they were focused on multiple distances simultaneously. He was young, maybe 32, lean and fit, dressed in practical outdoor clothing. He invited me in. His cabin was simple, but organized. One wall was completely covered with maps, some modern topographic maps, but others that looked hand-drawn, showing the Díínláa zone with various notations in both English and what I assumed was Athabascan. Another wall had photographs, dozens of them, all showing the zone at different times and from different angles. There were notebooks stacked on a desk, journals filled with handwritten notes. "This is my work," he said, gesturing at the walls. 8 years of documentation, observation, trying to understand the rules of the place. My grandmother told you about the walkers, between. That's what we are now, you and I. We exist partially in both layers. It's permanent. There's no going back. The question is whether we learn to navigate it or whether it destroys us. He made coffee, and we sat at his small table. For the next several hours, he taught me. He explained that the mark would continue to spread until it covered approximately 30% of my body's surface area, then stabilize. The spreading process would take between 6 months and 2 years, depending on factors he didn't fully understand. As it spread, my perceptions would change. I would begin to see what he called temporal echoes, visual overlays of past or future events occurring in the same location. I would sense dimensional boundaries, perceiving places where the layers pressed close together. I would sometimes hear or feel or know things without normal sensory input, information bleeding through from the other layers. The key, he said, was learning to filter and manage the information flow. Uncontrolled, it would overwhelm my consciousness, leading to the madness Sarah had mentioned. Controlled, it could be navigated, even utilized. He taught me meditation techniques that were part Athabascan traditional practice and part his own innovations. He showed me exercises for maintaining awareness of which layer I was primarily focused on at any given moment. He explained warning signs that I was slipping too far into the other layers and might have trouble returning to baseline reality. Most importantly, he taught me that the beings in the zone weren't hostile, at least not inherently. They were simply operating according to rules and perceptions different from ours. The danger came from misunderstanding, from trying to apply our logic to their reality, or vice versa. Over the following months, I met with Jacob regularly, sometimes weekly, sometimes more often, when I was struggling with particularly difficult adjustments. Dr. Moss also kept in contact, having me submit monthly reports on my condition and any observations from the zone. I learned that there were approximately 30 other people like me, marked individuals working with his agency in various capacities across North America. Most anomalous zones weren't as active or powerful as the Díínláa location, but they existed in specific geographic areas, often in remote wilderness, often in places that indigenous peoples had traditionally avoided or treated as sacred. The government had been monitoring these zones since the late 1940s, classifying them under various bureaucratic designations, trying to understand and contain them with mixed success. My role, as it developed, was to serve as a liaison between the agency and the Athabascan community, to monitor the Díínláa zone for changes, and to occasionally enter the zone when necessary for specific observations or interventions. The work was strange, dangerous, and unlike anything I'd trained for as a wildlife trooper. But it was also necessary. People did sometimes wander into the zone accidentally. Hunters, hikers, adventurers who ignored boundaries that weren't clearly marked because the government couldn't explain why those boundaries existed without revealing truths they weren't ready to acknowledge publicly. When people went missing in that area, I was often part of the search team because I could perceive things other searchers couldn't, track movements across layers, sometimes even sense where missing persons had gone, even if their physical bodies were no longer in baseline reality. I saved 3 people in the first year. I failed to save 7. The failures haunted me more than my own transformation. One incident stands out from that first year. It was November, 9 months after my initial crossing. I received a call about a missing hunter, a man named Robert Walsh from Anchorage who'd been elk hunting in the Tanana Flats and hadn't returned to his camp. His hunting partner had last seen him 2 days earlier, heading into a section of forest that I immediately recognized as being within the Díínláa zone. I organized a search team, but I also contacted Jacob and told him I might need to go deep into the zone to find Walsh. Jacob agreed to come as backup. We entered the zone at dawn, just the 2 of us, leaving the rest of the search team at the boundary, with instructions to wait exactly 12 hours and then leave whether we'd returned or not. Rules of the zone: you don't search after dark, and you don't stay too long, or you might not be able to find your way back. The crossing was easier now than it had been 9 months earlier. I could feel the transition, the moment when we moved from baseline reality into the zone proper. The air changed quality, becoming thicker, more resistant. Colors shifted slightly toward the blue end of the spectrum. Sounds became muffled, as if we were underwater. Time immediately started behaving strangely. My watch showed normal progression, but my internal sense of duration was different, stretched and compressed simultaneously. Jacob moved beside me with practiced ease, comfortable in the zone in a way I envied. We pushed deeper into the forest, following traces that only we could see, disturbances in the fabric of reality that normal people couldn't perceive. After what my watch said was 3 hours, but what felt like 20 minutes, or maybe 8 hours, impossible to tell, we found Walsh. He was sitting at the base of a large spruce tree, alive, conscious, apparently uninjured. He looked up at us when we approached, but his expression was strange, distant, like he was looking through us at something else. Jacob knelt beside him, checking him physically while I kept watch on our surroundings. Walsh seemed physically fine, but he wasn't responsive to questions. His eyes were moving, tracking things we couldn't see, and his lips were moving slightly as if he was speaking or listening to speech. Jacob looked up at me and shook his head slightly. "He's too far in," Jacob said quietly. "He's perceiving multiple layers simultaneously, and he's not grounded enough to distinguish them. If we pull him out now, he'll likely have a complete psychotic break. The human brain isn't designed to process nonlinear time without preparation." I asked what we could do. Jacob pulled out a small leather pouch, similar to the one his grandmother had given me. He opened it and removed what looked like dried plant material. He crushed it between his fingers and held it under Walsh's nose, speaking in Athabascan, words I didn't understand, but that had a rhythmic, grounding quality. Slowly, over the course of perhaps 10 minutes, Walsh's eyes began to focus. His breathing steadied. His awareness seemed to return to baseline reality. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "How long have I been here?" he asked. 2 days, I told him. 2 days, he repeated wonderingly. I thought it was 2 hours, or maybe 2 years. I kept seeing my daughter, but she was different ages, sometimes 7 like she is now, sometimes 15, sometimes 30, all at the same time. I saw my father, who's been dead for 20 years, but he was young, and he was telling me something important, but I couldn't understand the words. I saw animals, but they were wrong, shaped wrong, moving wrong. Where am I? You're in a place that's between places, Jacob said. We're going to take you out now, but you need to stay close to us and keep your eyes on the ground. Don't look at anything unusual. Don't respond if you hear voices. Don't touch anything that looks out of place. Do you understand? Walsh nodded weakly. We helped him to his feet and started back toward the boundary. The return trip was tense. Walsh kept trying to look around, kept starting to speak as if responding to voices we couldn't hear. Jacob and I had to constantly redirect his attention, keep him focused, maintain his connection to baseline reality. At one point, we passed through an area where past and present were overlapping visibly. I could see the forest as it was, sparse November vegetation and snow. But also, the forest as it had been perhaps 100 years ago. Dense old growth with trees that had since been logged, and also the forest as it might be in the future, burned or cleared or transformed into something I didn't recognize. Walsh saw it too and stopped walking, transfixed. We can't stay here, I said, pulling at his arm. This is where time pools. If we linger too long, we'll get stuck in the overlap, and we won't be able to determine which timeline to follow back. We pushed through, and eventually, after what felt like both an eternity and an instant, we reached the boundary. The transition back to baseline reality was like surfacing from deep water, a sudden change in pressure and perception. The rest of the search team was there, waiting. We'd been gone exactly 11 hours and 47 minutes by their clocks. Walsh required medical evacuation and spent 2 weeks in psychiatric observation in Anchorage. Dr. Moss's people intervened, classified the case under the Atomic Energy Act, ensured Walsh received appropriate treatment, and was never allowed to speak publicly about his experience. I heard later that he'd recovered, mostly, though he'd retired from hunting and avoided wilderness areas for the rest of his life. That incident taught me something important. The zone didn't just affect those who entered it. It affected everyone connected to them. Walsh had a wife, a daughter, friends, a community. All of them were impacted by his experience, even though they'd never know the truth of what happened. The zone created ripples, expanding circles of trauma and confusion and unanswered questions, and the zone was growing. By the end of my first year as a walker between, Dr. Moss's measurements showed the boundary had expanded by approximately 1.3 miles in radius. If expansion continued at that rate, the zone would begin affecting the park's highway within 15 years and populated areas within 30. Something was driving the expansion, and no one understood what. In year 2 of my work with the agency, I went deeper into the zone than I'd ever gone before. Dr. Moss had received reports from satellite imaging that showed anomalous readings near the geographic center of the zone, fluctuations in electromagnetic spectrum that suggested something was either generating unusual energy or warping the space around it. He wanted someone to investigate on the ground. Jacob and I volunteered, though Sarah Tritt strongly advised against it. The center of Díínláa is where the tear is widest, she said. That's where the layers are most thoroughly mixed. That's where the beings are strongest. People who go there don't always come back, and those who do come back are never the same. But we went anyway, because understanding the source of the expansion might reveal how to stop it. We entered at dawn on June 21st, summer solstice, when the boundary would be thinnest, and therefore, when penetrating to the center, would be theoretically easiest. We carried minimal gear, knowing that technology would fail and that physical supplies might become liabilities. We carried protection medicine from Sarah, grounding techniques we'd learned, and determination to reach the center and return before dark. The journey to the center took all day by external clock time, but felt like we passed through weeks or months of subjective experience. The forest changed as we penetrated deeper, becoming less like normal Alaskan, boreal forest, and more like something from a dream, or a child's distorted memory of what forest should be. Trees grew in spirals, their trunks twisting around themselves. Branches extended at impossible angles, defying gravity. Leaves were colors that didn't exist in normal spectrum, colors that hurt to look at because human eyes weren't designed to process them. The sky overhead showed multiple times of day simultaneously. Dawn in one direction, noon in another, sunset in a third, midnight directly above, all bleeding together. Time stopped having meaning entirely. We walked and might have covered 5 miles, or 50 or 5 feet, impossible to judge. We encountered beings regularly now. Most ignored us, moving through the forest on their own errands, shapes that shifted and changed as they moved, forms that were human, then animal, then something else entirely. A few acknowledged us, voices speaking in those multitonal harmonies, words or concepts that bypassed language and delivered meaning directly into consciousness. They called Jacob Brother Walker and called me New Child, and sometimes they tried to encourage us to stay, to stop moving through the layers sequentially, and instead exist in all layers simultaneously like they did. Jacob kept us grounded, kept us moving, maintained our focus on the center. Finally, after subjective eternities, we reached it. The center of Díínláa wasn't a place in the normal sense. It was a wound, exactly as Sarah had described it. Reality itself was torn here, ripped open, exposing something underneath or beyond that human perception wasn't equipped to process. The tear was perhaps 30 feet across, a ragged opening that wasn't empty, but was filled with something my brain interpreted as simultaneously solid and liquid and gaseous, and none of those things. Something that existed in dimensions my mind couldn't count or comprehend. Looking at it directly was painful, like trying to see through tears, like vertigo, like every sense being overstimulated and understimulated at once. Around the tear, the beings gathered. Not just the humanoid shapes I'd encountered before, but other forms, things that were pure geometry, living mathematical equations, conscious patterns of light and sound, entities that existed as ideas or emotions given form. They were maintaining the tear, I realized. Not widening it, but not closing it either. Holding it open, stable, keeping it from either healing or expanding uncontrollably. One of the beings approached us. This one seemed older than the others, more stable in form, appearing almost human, though still with that translucent, multi-layered quality that marked it as other. It spoke, and I understood. "You are the new guardians," it said, or conveyed. "The ones who walk both sides. You want to understand why the wound grows. We will show you." Suddenly, I was seeing the history of the place. Information downloaded directly into my consciousness without the intermediary of language or traditional sensory input. The wound had been opened in 1947, not by accident, but deliberately, by an experiment conducted by military researchers who'd believed they could weaponize quantum tunneling effects. They'd succeeded in creating a stable portal between dimensional layers, but hadn't understood the the consequences. The portal couldn't be closed once opened. It could only be maintained, kept at a stable size through constant attention from the beings who existed in the other layers. But maintaining it required energy, drew resources from the land itself. And as modern civilization continued to expand around it, continued to push boundaries and ignore warnings, the strain increased. The wound was growing, not because the beings wanted it to, but because they were struggling to maintain containment against increasing pressure from human activity. If the wound grew too large, the entity seemed to convey, the boundaries between layers would collapse across a much larger area. Not just 47 square miles, but potentially hundreds or thousands. Reality itself would become unstable across interior Alaska. Time would fracture. Physical laws would become suggestions rather than rules. Consciousness would spread and merge, individual minds blending into collective awareness. From the being's perspective, this might not be catastrophic. They existed in that state naturally. But for humans, for creatures evolved to experience linear time and individual consciousness, it would be functionally the end of recognizable existence. The entity continued. "We call to those who can hear us," it said. "We mark them, make them into bridges, hope they will help maintain the boundaries. But your kind resists understanding. Your agencies send soldiers and scientists who try to control what cannot be controlled, to weaponize what should be respected. Every violation strains the wound further. You must convince your people to stop, to mark clear boundaries and enforce them, to prevent entry to this place, to let it be. That is the only way to prevent expansion." I asked, through whatever telepathic connection we were using, if there was any way to actually close the wound, to heal the tear. The entity's response was heavy with what I interpreted as sorrow. The wound could have been closed in the first hours after opening. Now it has existed too long, integrated too deeply with both layers. Closing it would require unraveling 77 years of quantum entanglement, pulling apart connections that have grown into the fabric of reality itself. We lack the knowledge to accomplish this. Perhaps your scientists could discover a method, but it would require them to understand truths they currently dismiss as impossible. The conversation, if it could be called that, continued for what felt like hours. The entity showed us more, taught us more, explained the nature of their existence and their relationship with the wounded boundary between layers. Then it sent us back, not through the forest, but directly, instantaneously. One moment we were at the center, the next we were at the boundary, emerging exactly where we'd entered. The sun was setting. By external clock, we'd been gone almost 14 hours. Jacob and I stumbled out of the zone, both of us physically and mentally exhausted, our minds still processing information that didn't fit into normal cognitive frameworks. The mark on my chest had grown significantly during the journey, now covering perhaps 25% of my torso. Jacob's mark had spread too, creeping further up his neck. We made it to our vehicles and drove to Healy in silence, too overwhelmed for conversation. That night at Jacob's cabin, we tried to write down what we'd experienced, to document what we'd learned. But words felt inadequate. How do you describe dimensions that have no vocabulary in human language? How do you explain quantum entanglement to people who can barely comprehend three-dimensional space? How do you convince a government bureaucracy to stop trying to control something when control is literally impossible? We did our best. We wrote reports for Dr. Moss, detailed accounts with as much precision as we could manage. We provided recommendations. Establish a clear boundary at least 2 miles from the current edge of the zone. Enforce it strictly. Prevent all entry. Stop all surveillance and research activities that required physical presence in the zone itself. And most importantly, publicly acknowledge that the area was dangerous, even if the full truth couldn't be revealed. Acknowledge it as a toxic site, a radiation hazard, anything that would keep people out without revealing the actual nature of the phenomenon. Dr. Moss thanked us for the reports, but I never learned if our recommendations were implemented. Government agencies move slowly and often in ways invisible to field operatives like me. What I did learn was that 4 months after our journey to the center, the zone's expansion rate decreased from 1.3 miles per year to 0.4 miles per year. Something about our visit, about the communication that had occurred, had apparently made a difference. The beings were able to maintain the wound more effectively, or perhaps they'd been reassured that some humans were trying to help rather than exploit, and that reassurance had given them strength or motivation to resist expansion. 3 years have passed since March 15, 2024. The mark now covers approximately 30% of my body, stable as Jacob predicted, no longer spreading. I exist partially in both layers now, permanently. I perceive temporal echoes constantly, seeing past and future bleeding into present. I sense dimensional boundaries everywhere, not just in Díínláa, but in other locations across Alaska and beyond. I know when solstices and equinoxes are coming, not from calendars, but from feeling the thinning of boundaries that occurs at those times. I can communicate after a fashion with the beings that exist in the other layers, though the communication is imperfect and often confusing. I'm still a wildlife trooper officially, still perform my regular duties, still respond to calls and file reports. But my real work is as a walker between, as a guardian of the boundary, as someone who helps protect both layers from violations that could destabilize everything. Jacob and I are part of a small network now, perhaps 30 people scattered across North America, all marked, all walking between layers, all working to maintain boundaries that most people don't know exist. Sarah Tritt died last year at age 74. Her grandson continues her work, teaching traditional knowledge to new walkers between, helping those who are marked to navigate their transformations without going mad. Her role was recognized, finally, by Dr. Moss's agency, though of course that recognition will never be public. There's a memorial to her in a classified database somewhere, acknowledging her contributions to boundary maintenance and her efforts to bridge indigenous knowledge with modern science. She would have been amused by that, I think. She never cared much about official recognition. She cared about protecting her people and protecting the land and protecting the boundaries between layers, because those boundaries, she always said, were sacred trust given to humans not to control, but to respect. I'm writing this account now because I believe people have a right to know, even if they can't fully understand. If you're planning to visit interior Alaska, if you're a hunter or hiker or adventurer seeking pristine wilderness, you should be aware that there are places in this state where normal rules don't apply. There are areas where time flows strangely and where the boundaries between layers are thin enough that you might cross without meaning to. Watch for warnings, even if they're not official signs. Watch for cairns marking territory. Watch for areas where technology fails inexplicably. Watch for forest that feels wrong, too quiet or too loud, where animals behave strangely, or where you see things in peripheral vision that vanish when you look directly. If you experience any of these signs, turn back immediately. Don't investigate. Don't document. Don't try to prove anything to yourself or others. Some boundaries exist for reasons that transcend human curiosity and human hubris. I've lost colleagues to the zone, people who were marked but couldn't handle the transformation, who went mad from expanded perception, who slipped too far into the other layers and couldn't find their way back to baseline reality. I've pulled bodies from the forest, or what remained of bodies, of people who violated boundaries they didn't know existed. I've comforted families who will never know the truth of what happened to their loved ones, because the truth is classified under the Atomic Energy Act, and because the truth, honestly, would drive most people to psychological breakdown. This is the cost of maintaining the boundaries. This is the price of existing between layers. You become a guardian, but you lose the simplicity of normal existence. You see too much, know too much, carry too much awareness of how fragile reality actually is. The mark on my chest is cold always now, a constant reminder of my connection to the wound at the center of Díínláa. I feel it pulse sometimes, synchronized with something vast and distant that I don't fully comprehend. I dream in multiple timelines, experiencing different versions of my life simultaneously, sometimes waking unsure which timeline I'm actually in. My relationships with people who aren't marked have become difficult because I perceive them differently now, see them as they were, and as they will be, and as they might be in alternate timelines all at once. It's isolating. The other walkers between understand, but we're scattered, and our work is solitary by necessity. But the work matters. Last month, I prevented a group of teenagers from entering the zone on a dare. They'd heard rumors about strange occurrences in the forest and wanted to investigate for their YouTube channel. I stopped them at the boundary, used my authority as a wildlife trooper to turn them away, invented a story about hazardous materials contamination from an old military site. They were disappointed, but they left. They'll never know. I might have saved their lives, or at least their sanity. 2 months ago, I found a lost hiker at the edge of the zone, a woman from Minnesota who'd been separated from her tour group. She'd been walking parallel to the boundary for 6 hours without realizing it, feeling increasingly disoriented and frightened. I guided her back to safety, but not before I noticed she'd started to develop a small mark on her hand where she'd touched one of the cairns marking the boundary. I contacted Dr. Moss immediately. His people will monitor her, provide support if the mark spreads, recruit her if necessary. She'll have a choice I never really had, because they intervene earlier now, having learned from the mistakes made with people like me who were left to navigate transformation alone for too long. The zone is stable now, for the moment. Expansion has slowed to approximately 0.3 miles per year. Manageable, containable. The beings at the center seem to have achieved a better balance in maintaining the wound. But stability is temporary. The fundamental problem remains unsolved. The wound exists. It cannot be closed with current knowledge, and human pressure on the boundaries continues. Eventually, something will shift. Perhaps a new generation of scientists will discover how to actually heal the tear between dimensions. Perhaps the beings will find ways to strengthen their maintenance of the boundary, Perhaps the expansion will accelerate again and force more drastic measures. Or perhaps, and this is what I fear most, the wound will reach a critical size where containment becomes impossible and the layers will collapse into each other across a vast area, transforming interior Alaska into something that's neither our reality nor theirs, but some merged state where humans cannot survive as individual conscious entities. That's the nightmare scenario Dr. Moss's people are working to prevent. That's why walkers between exist, to serve as early warning systems, to communicate with beings across layers, to help maintain boundaries through understanding rather than through force. Time isn't a line here, brother. That's what the being said to me during my first encounter, and I understand now what it meant. Time is a web, all moments connected, all possibilities existing simultaneously. Linear time is an illusion created by limited perception, a necessary illusion that allows individual consciousness to function, but an illusion nonetheless. In Díínláa, that illusion breaks down. You see the web directly, experience all moments at once, and most human minds cannot process that experience without fragmenting. Those of us who carry the mark exist partially in the web now, always. We can't unsee what we've seen. We can't unknow what we know. We're permanently changed, permanently connected to something vast and terrible and beautiful beyond normal human comprehension. Is that a curse or a gift? I still don't know. Some days it feels like curse, like burden, like punishment for having crossed a boundary I should have respected. Other days, it feels like gift, like expanded awareness, like seeing truth behind illusion. Most days, it feels like simple duty, like work that needs to be done by someone, and I happen to be chosen or unlucky enough to be in the right place at the wrong time. If you're watching this from Alaska, if you live in interior Alaska, or plan to visit, please take this seriously. Please respect the boundaries, even if you don't understand the reasons for them. Please don't seek out the zone out of curiosity, or for thrill-seeking, or to prove yourself. The zone will mark you if you enter it, and that mark is permanent and irreversible, and will change your life in ways you cannot currently imagine. I'm telling you this not to frighten you, but to warn you, because warnings save lives, and because people deserve to know the truth, even if the official agencies won't acknowledge it. Drop a comment if you're from Alaska. Tell me if you've ever felt something strange in the wilderness, if you've ever encountered something that didn't make sense, if you've ever found yourself losing time or seeing things that shouldn't be there. You're not crazy. You're not imagining things. You might have brushed against the boundaries without realizing it. And if you have, if you've experienced anything like what I've described, contact me. Dr. Moss's people can help. There's a network now, support systems for people who've been marked or who've had encounters with anomalous zones. You don't have to navigate this alone. My name is Thomas Vickers, and I'm an Alaska wildlife trooper, and a walker between and a guardian of boundaries that most people will never see. I exist partially in two layers of reality simultaneously. I carry a mark that connects me to a wound in space-time at the center of a 47 square mile zone in interior Alaska. I see past and future bleeding into present. I communicate with beings that exist outside linear time. I'm changed forever, and I'm still changing, and I don't know where this transformation will ultimately lead. But I'm still here, still human enough to function in baseline reality, still committed to protecting people from crossing boundaries they're not prepared to cross. The work continues. The zone remains. The wound at the center pulses with energies I can feel from 100 miles away. The beings maintain their vigil, holding reality together at a place where it was torn apart by human arrogance and human curiosity that exceeded human wisdom. And I walk between layers, doing what I can, carrying knowledge I never wanted, serving a purpose I never sought. This is my story. This is my warning. Welcome to Alaska, where the wilderness is vaster than you can imagine, and where some places exist between layers of reality that were never meant to be bridged. Be careful where you wander. Not all boundaries are visible, and not all warnings are posted on signs. Some truths are written in the land itself, in the spaces between worlds, in the thinning that occurs at certain times and certain places. Listen to those truths. Respect those boundaries. And if you ever find yourself in a forest where your compass spins and your GPS fails, and you hear voices singing in harmonies that hurt to hear, turn back immediately. Don't seek answers. Don't investigate. Don't try to understand. Just turn back and be grateful that you recognized the warning before the zone marked you as it marked me. Time isn't a line. The boundary is thin. Some places remember everything, and the beings that exist between layers are neither hostile nor friendly, but simply other, operating according to rules that predate human civilization and that will continue long after we're gone. I carry their mark now, cold and dark against my skin, spreading no further but never fading. I carry their message. Respect the boundaries. Maintain the protocols. Protect the thin places. Because reality is more fragile than you know. And the layers are pressed together more tightly than you imagine. And it wouldn't take much, really, for everything to collapse into something that human consciousness cannot survive. That's the truth that classified documents hide, that government agencies can't acknowledge, that indigenous elders tried to warn about for generations while being ignored. That's the truth I'm sharing now. Consequences be damned, because people have a right to know what exists in their own wilderness, in their own state, in the places they might hike or hunt or explore, thinking they're safe. You're not safe everywhere. Some places aren't meant for us. Some boundaries must not be crossed. Remember that, and maybe, just maybe, you'll avoid the fate that claimed me and the others who now walk between layers, serving as guardians of a wound we didn't create, but that we're now responsible for maintaining until someone discovers how to heal it, or until it finally grows too large to contain and transforms everything we know into something we can't recognize. That's my story. That's my truth. Thank you for listening. Stay safe out there. Respect the wilderness. And if you ever feel the boundary thinning around you, turn back before it's too late.